water soluble. So all methyl cellulose is water soluble glue essentially. It's used a lot in bookbinding, I believe, which works great for origami.
Where did you buy it?
I bought mine from a shop in New York called Talos. I think they have a pretty good price for methyl cellulose if you're going to buy it in bulk. I think the smallest amount you can buy is like either a pound or a kilogram. You get, you saw that big bag, and that's the powder of it. Like, that's a tiny amount of that is going to make a bottle like this.
So at an art supply store, you'll find a bottle about this big, and about this big around, and it'll cost about $12. So for the amount that you get, it's a lot more expensive than if you get a pound of it.
Yeah.
But that bottle lasted me like 10 years. He uses way more than I do in terms of just overall. But if you're relatively casual about your use, you don't need a pound. A pound is like more than a lifetime supply for most people, most likely. So just be aware that you can get a small amount.
Like maybe a teaspoon, but just a guessing.
It's like, I guess my confusion is how much methyl cellulose to apply when before you're how is it
we'll
too
get
much?
there. I'll show you.
Do it right now.
Okay.
And you'll get a feel for it, and once you start doing it, it's not going to be, it's not very mysterious, or it's not a finicky process either.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for, if you put too much on, it just kind of takes longer to dry. There's probably a particular threshold where you might loop it on a little bit too thick, but it's really hard to mess up, actually. Don't you think?
I think it depends on the thickness of the paper too.
Can you compare this to like Mod Podge or something? Or
Well, Mod Podge is more like a permanent kind of protective coating, I think, more than...
Isn't methyl cellulose the same thing?
Well, the goal of applying methyl cellulose here is going to be twofold. The main reason, and you could do this just to a single sheet too, but this paper is like really floppy. It's not going to hold its shape. It's just like feels horrible for folding, right? So once you put methyl cellulose on this and let it dry, it's going to be really crisp. It'll hold a crease really well, and you'll be able to wet fold with it. So applying methyl cellulose adds sizing to the paper, which gives it all these really nice properties for origami, but it is also glue after all. So if you want to stick two sheets of paper together, you can kind of size the paper and glue them together to make duo paper at the same time. And that's what we're going to be doing today. Sherry, you had a question?
Is it a plant material?
Methyl cellulose, yeah, it's derived, I think, from some plant material. I don't know.
It's long chain sugars. That's the cellulose part. It is cellulose.
Okay, but
it's
I
methylated
think it goes through
cellulose.
some kind of process.
Yeah.
And Mod Podge is more like PVA, which is an adhesive.
And it would probably not be effective by water because it would cure.
PVA. Yeah. Right.
The Mod
Soluble. So you saw the bag of powder. You mix that in water, and then you get this gooey stuff. It also means that once you get MC-sized paper wet, it'll dissolve the MC and allow you to wet fold. That's the idea.
Now, is there any potential problem with the paper if you're back to delaminating while you're folding then?
There are some issues. We could get into that later.
Okay.
But I think it'd be a good time to just kind of go through the process of this. I think it'll make a lot more sense once you guys have gotten your hands on this, and then we can, I think you'll have a lot more questions then, and we can jump into kind of full panel mode after that and go through a lot of, some more in-depth discussion.
And also, once you guys get started on doing it, we can talk more while you work, but we need things to dry eventually.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So I think things will get a little bit wild for a while here, but we'll rein it back in and then get talking some more. So I'm going to show you my method of backcoating paper. This also applies just for doing a single sheet too, and I'll let you know when we're done with that. So what we're pretty much going to do is we're going to size this paper and glue it together. So it'll be good for wet folding, good for folding in general, and then you'll have 2 different colors on one side. And this is just some cheap paper I got at Dick Blick. That, you know, you can grab some of this too. It's decent for folding. Or you know, you can experiment with a bunch of other papers. And I'm sure we'll get into talking about what papers are suitable for folding and what papers you can do this with and all that.
And incidentally, World Market sells a mulberry tissue paper that you can experiment with that's reasonably cheap. It's like $2 for 2 relatively large sheets.
Right.
So there's one of those not too far from that.
Okay, so this paper is called Unryu. You can see a lot of different fibers swirling around in all different directions. And this paper is made by pouring paper on a mesh, and then the fibers just kind of go around, and there's all these big inclusions. It's I think usually used as a decorative paper, but it has a nice texture to it, and it works decently well for folding. The first step that I do is I'm going to talk you through it and then demonstrate it, and have you guys do it along with me at that point. But paper expands when it gets wet. So one thing that I've had a problem with is some people will just put the paper down, paint it with methyl cellulose. It'll soak through the paper, kind of adhere it gently to the backing, and then it'll dry. What I've noticed when you do that is when you get it wet, the paper expands, and then it's kind of stuck to the sheet, and it has nowhere to go, so it just wrinkles all up. And then when it dries, sometimes you get those wrinkles still in the paper. So what I do to prevent that is I spray the paper with some water so it pre-expands and then glue it to the backing here. Yeah. And another issue that some people have, I think Todd may have had some issues with this as well, but sometimes when you just coat the surface of the paper and let it soak through, the paper needs to stick to the backing a little bit to be able to kind of hold its shape as it dries and stay flat and not wrinkle up. But I've had issues with, if you just coat the surface, the paper kind of coming unstuck a little bit from the back as it dries and wrinkling up. So what I like to do also is just paint a little bit of methyl cellulose on the backing to stick the paper down, make sure it's not going to come undone. Now, since this is such a smooth surface, the methyl cellulose isn't really going to stick to this. It's going to stick the paper enough to hold its shape and stay in place while it's drying, but it's really easy to peel off generally. Again, I know Todd has had some issues with that.
But I did finally do some experimenting with the Rain-X. I was using a big mirror. It worked well. It still seems to be peeling off okay, and I applied that Rain-X, I don't know, 9 or 10 months ago.
Interesting. I'm sure we'll get talking about that. But let me walk you guys through this process here. So step 1, get out 1 sheet of paper and a spray bottle. And
yes, one thing that I've found with this is that the sheet of paper that you put down first absorbs more water generally than the sheet you put on second. So something that I do is, if you've got, say, black and white paper, the chances of the black paper bleeding are fairly high. So I generally stick the lighter color paper down first, not the darker one, because there's a bigger chance of bleeding if you the paper that gets the most water will bleed the most, right? So you want the paper, the lighter color paper should be the first one to put down.
okay.
Right. So you're able to actually get white on your things that are backcoated to white, whereas the rest of us are like, that's mostly white.
That's interesting. Well, I'm going to totally violate that, and we'll see how often I do that as an experiment. So you guys do.
Maybe this doesn't bleed though.
Okay. Yeah, it really
no,
depends on.
This stuff bleeds.
Okay.
I can tell you from experience, this stuff bleeds. It's not. This isn't the highest quality paper, so it will bleed a little bit, but no problem. You can use better quality paper or softer brushes, and okay, let's just get to it. So I'm going to walk you through my method, and I'm sure everyone here on this panel will disagree with me on some point in this, and we'll talk through that. And this is what I found that works for me. Everyone has a different method for this. So I'm just going to hold this up so you can see, but I just spray the paper a little bit lightly on one side, lightly on the other, just enough to get it a little bit wet. You don't want it super soaked like you just dumped it in a tank of water or something, because it does get pretty weak and really floppy and hard to work with if you get it too wet. So just enough so you can tell it's wet, and that'll be enough to expand it pretty much as it's going to expand when you get it wet. So you can set that aside for now and just let it sit there and soak up a little bit of moisture. And then get out your methyl cellulose. Now, I have my big tub, and I'll generally for this use my giant paintbrush and slather it on. But for you guys, you have this squeeze bottle. So just squeeze out maybe, I don't know, about this much methyl cellulose, if you guys can see. Just a couple squeezes, and put a real thin layer down on the board, and that'll help adhere the paper as it's drying. You just want a really thin layer here, because it can be the case that if you put down too much, it'll stick too much and be hard to tear off or hard to peel off, and you might tear a little bit if you're not careful. I think we've got some methyl cellulose on the table. It's water soluble, so it's water soluble, it's non-toxic, it's pretty nice adhering.
It just doesn't taste good.
Word of warning, if you spill this stuff, clean it up very carefully, because if it dries and then it gets wet again, it will be slippery and you will fall and hurt yourself.
Yeah.
Experience.
First. Okay, so I just squeeze a little bit on and get just a real thin layer.
Just like it's paint, like you're putting in a coating it, it's a thin layer of paint.
Just relax. I mean, for what it's worth, I don't do it this way. I put down the damp paper, brush on some MC, flip it over, and smooth it out onto the sheet.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get there. This is real simple process. It's a very forgiving process. So don't worry if you put down too much methyl cellulose or whatever. So the next step is you have your paper that you soaked in some water. You want to lay that down here. This is harder with bigger paper, but you want to lay it down kind of one end to the other and try to smooth out any wrinkles real gently, because the paper is wet. If you're too rough with it, it will start to kind of disintegrate depending on the paper you're using. But hopefully you should be able to get it, especially with this small size, not too bad. It's not too bad to just lay it down and have it be pretty much wrinkle-free. And it'll stick down to the board since you have that methyl cellulose on there. This isn't coming off of there. So that's step one. Now the next step is you want to get some more methyl cellulose to actually size this. The MC we put down on the board is just a teeny thin layer to just stick it there, and we want to get a good amount of methyl cellulose soaked into the paper. So you can just squeeze a little bit of this right on the paper, and then grab your brush and start smoothing this out, painting it on the paper essentially. And you want to paint on enough so the whole paper looks pretty wet. And you're going to notice here with these brushes and this paper, some of the fibers are going to kind of come off on the brush. If you use a softer brush and more resilient paper, this won't happen. But don't worry about that, it'll turn out fine. The paper isn't really going to get destroyed too much.
What I often do is I take a roller, or like just the carton that rolls the paper come on, and I roll this paper onto that, and then I roll the paper onto the table.
That's a good idea, especially with a big sheet. That probably makes
a big sheet. It works a lot better as opposed to laying it down, rolling it down.